Okay, so we can look at the kidney, just in terms of what the specification shows then. So a couple of bits include this. I'm not going to cover everything today because it's quite a large topic, in particular just to focus on things I'm probably not going to cover. We're not going to focus a huge amount on urea today in terms of its production. You should all hopefully be aware that urea is excess amino acids. The reason we're not going to focus on that today is because urea is produced in the liver. It is a relevant part of what we're going to talk about today, but we're not going to do a huge amount of details on urea just because that's a slightly different part of the course. Just be aware of that. But we are going to try and focus and complete all of the stuff that is kidney related. So in particular, our aim for the next 20 odd minutes is to focus on osmosis and water loss, the specific function of the kidney. We're going to look at ADH, and then we're going to hopefully get on to looking at what happens if your kidney fails. So how we can treat kidney failure, the two different ways in which we can treat kidney failure. So any question related to water loss, your ears should instantly prick up and think the question is going to be talking about osmosis. So whenever talking about the movement of water, please make sure you're using the word osmosis. Don't drop a silly mark by not including the word osmosis. Osmosis is, of course, the movement of water. You will get a mark if you say from a high concentration to a low concentration, so don't worry if you do say that. Other words that are potentially better to use, though, would be to say it goes from a dilute solution to a concentrated solution. The reason I'm focusing on these words, dilute and concentrated, because they're two words we're also going to use in reference to urine, and in particular the water concentration of urine. So either do we have dilute urine or do we have concentrated urine? We're focusing on water. Okay, so before we look at the explicit function of the kidney, we're going to look at a very general structure as to what it looks like. So hopefully you are all aware that you have two kidneys. Much like the heart, you always refer to the kidney as if it's on your body. So this one is actually my left kidney, and this one is my right kidney, because I'm referring to it as if it's on my body. Just a little thing to add a bit of extra vision. On top of the kidneys, you have the adrenal gland, which is part of our specification, and the adrenal gland secretes adrenaline. And then let's look at blood vessels. So you have a very important blood vessel going in to each kidney. This is called my renal artery. It's an artery because it's going away from the heart and then coming out of the kidneys to go back into the vena cava. You have a renal vein. So these are veins because they are going back into the heart and they carry deoxygenated blood, much like nearly all veins do, apart from my pulmonary vein. So this is the structure of my kidney. What we're going to focus on in particular is the production of urine today. All of your kidney, all the urine kind of gathers in this part of the kidney, which we're going to look at today, and goes into one of these tubes, depending upon, obviously, which kidney it comes from. These tubes are called ureters. So you have one from your left kidney, one from your right kidney. These both go into your bladder. The bladder then stores your urine. And then you have a tube that comes out of your bladder and leaves your body. And this is called your urethra. So that's just the general structure of your excretory system. Key things that they could talk to you about are the structure of the arteries, the veins, and then the kidney itself, which we were going to focus on in today's lesson. Okay? Right. So, if I were to very simply break down the kidney, first of all, I'm just going to go for my general function of the kidney. My general function of the kidney is to filter the blood. So that would be, if it was a 1 mark answer for the function of the kidneys filter the blood. Okay, so we're going to look at that. Often this will be a kind of 5 mark question to describe how the kidney filters the blood. And the 3 key ways in which it filters the blood are by these 3 processes. We're going to go over all 3 in a lot more detail, but it filters, first of all, as we said. It's then focused on reabsorption, and then it's selective reabsorption. So those are the three ways in which the kidney works. Filtration first, the reabsorption of certain molecules, and selective reabsorption of other molecules. Okay? So now we're going to focus on each one of those in a bit more detail. Okay? I'm just going to very quickly draw a diagram which shows what the kidney looks like. Okay, you don't need to know this diagram in a huge amount of detail because they would give you this diagram in the exam, but you'd be expected to apply your knowledge for how it's adapted. Okay, so this is your kidney. Obviously, this is my diagram of the kidney here. You have inside the kidney millions of molecules that look like this. Okay, these are called nephrons. As I say, you've got absolutely millions of them. You would not be expected to know explicitly the structure of a nephron, although I'm going to talk about it in a second. But this is a nephron. But what you would be expected to do is apply your knowledge of exchange to see how it's adapted. So the very first thing, hopefully, you're going to pick up just from my diagram is the nephron has a large surface area. So anything related to exchange has a large surface area. It means it's got lots of space for things to go in and out of, in this case, the nephron and into the blood. It's a large surface area. It is also, each part of the nephron is only one cell thick, which means we have a short diffusion distance. So it doesn't take a huge amount of time for things to diffuse from one side into the other. Next thing, my nephron is surrounded by a very complex blood supply. So we say, and the word I like to use, is it has a copious blood supply. The advantage of a blood supply means every time anything goes into the blood, it gets moved along quickly. And what that means in terms of explaining the adaptation is a copious blood supply maintains the concentration gradient. So at each point there is a maintained concentration gradient, which is another adaptation for exchange. And the final adaptation, these are all generic, but it's just making sure we can apply our knowledge. If I were just to zoom in on one of these, on any part of the nephron really I could have chosen, I'm just now going to draw what one of the cells looks like. Okay, so imagine this is one of my cells. So there's two parts of this cell which make it really good for its function. One, you can see from what I've labelled, it's got these things here which hopefully you can remember from your knowledge of the small intestine, have microvilli. Microvilli are organelles, so they are an adapted organelle, and they also further increase the surface area of the kidney. And then the final one, which you should hopefully identify, is we've got these organelles, which are mitochondria. Mitochondria is where aerobic respiration occurs, which releases energy. How does that relate to exchange? Well, that energy is used for active transport. Thank you. No, appreciate the keenness. Okay, so they're just kind of, it could be a 5-mark question. You'd never be expected to know the function, the structure of the nephron. They could give you a diagram, you have to apply your knowledge, which is a really hard thing if you've never looked at it before. But actually these 5 things here, large surface area, one cell thick, blood supply, microvilli and mitochondria, are all things you'd have seen in other parts of GCSE biology. It's just using that knowledge to be explicit in there. Okay, so that's the adaptations. We're now going to look in more detail at the process in which it occurs. Okay, so we're going to kind of, as I said before, we're going to split this into 3 parts because, as I said, there's basically 3 parts of the kidney which are involved. So the first stage, if you can remember, is filtration. So this is the filtering of the blood. So a bit of a recap for us here. So here I have my blood which is flowing, so the renal artery coming in, leaving as the renal vein. You should be aware of lots of things inside my blood. So obviously, I have my red blood cells, I have my white blood cells, I've got platelets, I've got large proteins, and then I've got the smaller molecules. I've got my glucoses, I've got my amino acids, I've got my water molecules, I've got my ions, and then I've got urea. Okay? I've deliberately exaggerated that there based on size, because the first thing that happens in the kidney is we filter, and filtration separates large molecules from small molecules. And all that's going to happen in the first part of the kidney, which looks like this, is we filter the small molecules out of the blood into the kidney. The large molecules will stay in because they're too large to be filtered out. The small molecules are small enough to fit through the gaps between the capillary linings, those endothelial linings, and the small molecules filter into the kidney here. There are 5 molecules you need to be aware of that filter in, which means everything else stays inside the blood. So the 5 that go into your kidney are glucose, amino acids, water, ions, which mainly we're talking about sodium ions and chloride ions, but there are more, but you can just say ions generically, or you could just say sodium ions. And the final one, of course, is urea. So you could get asked to evaluate a table which shows the molecules inside and outside the kidney. In a healthy person, these should be the only 5 things that go into the kidney. A sign of somebody who's got an unhealthy kidney or the start of kidney failure is if you end up with proteins in there or blood cells in there, red blood cells. So if you're urinating red blood cells, that's a sign you've got an unhealthy kidney. Okay, so you should only have these 5 in there. So that's the first sign there. Right, the next stage then. So the next stage goes on to the part of my kidney which looked a bit like this, my large surface area, and my cells that had microvilli and the mitochondria, which is going to be very important. So if I carry on with my bloodstream here, okay, obviously it's got all of those things in it. This then part of the kidney is the reabsorption. And in particular, it's important for 2 things. All, 100%, every single molecule in a healthy person, all of the glucose and all of the amino acids that were originally filtered into the kidney now go back into the blood because they are useful molecules. So all of the glucose and all of the amino acids get filtered back into the blood. They will originally get filtered by diffusion because they're going from a high concentration in the kidney to a low concentration in the blood because all of it got filtered out in the first stage. But then you're going to get to a point where there's more in the blood than there is in the kidney. So that's where we use active transport to move them against the concentration gradient, which is why we have the mitochondria. Because we want to ensure there is, in your urine, in a healthy person, there should be no glucose and no amino acids in your urine. Because it all should have been reabsorbed. Okay? Again, a sign of diabetes, where you can't control your glucose levels, is glucose in your urine. Because there's too much glucose in your blood. So that is, again, a question they could ask you, which links to a different part of the spec. Okay? The final part of the kidney, so we've done filtration, we've done reabsorption, is another type of reabsorption, but we call it selective reabsorption. And this now takes in most of the rest of the kidney, really. Okay? And this will all depend on how much water you've how much water you've drunk. So this will depend upon how much you've drunk in a day and how much you exercise / how much you sweat in a day. Because if you've not drunk a lot and you've done lots of exercise, your body's got a really low amount of water now because you've lost lots of water due to sweating. So you don't want to be getting rid of water in your urine because it's essential, you need it. So what will happen then is selective reabsorption is of two things. It's to selectively reabsorb any water that you need, but also if you sweat a lot, it's to reabsorb some ions. So that's why we call it selective reabsorption, because it'll be different for everybody in this room. Because it'll be different depending upon your body's need for water and ions. If you've drunk lots in a day and you've not done any exercise, you don't need to retain that water. You can get rid of it in your urine. So that's selective reabsorption. So they're the three things, and they're the three kind of different stages of the kidney. Okay? Right. That's in general how the kidney works. We're now going to talk in a bit more detail about selective reabsorption. Question, go.
For reabsorption, when it says it reabsorbs all glucose, right, then how, like insulin and insulin, is insulin, sorry, I'm trying to struggle to actually think about this question. If it reabsorbs all glucose, so we have enough glucose, how is the glucose selected in the gut?
That's different. That's glucoregulation. That's ensuring that your cells have enough. But what we want to ensure is we're not wasting any. Because at least then your body, insulin and glucagon can then control it. But we don't want to lose it uselessly in urine. So you want to make sure at least your body can then decide if it goes into your cell or gets stored as glycogen. You don't want to lose it in urine. Either use it in the cells or store it as glycogen. That's what we do rather than lose it in urine. Okay. Before I talk about the selective reabsorption, I'm going to very quickly do a recap on the brain, because this is again linked to it. So you all should be able to just recall really that your brain looks a little bit like this, okay? And there are a few sections of the brain you need to be able to identify. The first part of the brain, the main part of the brain here, is called my cerebral cortex, which is also sometimes called my cerebrum. The cerebrum is for conscious thought, intelligence, memory, all of those type of things. Okay? The back of your brain is called your cerebellum. The cerebellum is all to do with movement, so muscle movement and balance. But the thing I wanted to focus on is this part of your brain, okay, which is, all of it is called your brainstem. But there are three things in particular I wanted to focus on in the brainstem. The brainstem is the most important part of your brain. You would not be able to function without the brainstem, because it contains these three things. It contains your hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus, the H is important because the H also means the hypothalamus is the control point for homeostasis. Next to the hypothalamus is the master gland, which is very important in homeostasis, called your pituitary gland. The reason I'm focusing on this, because related to what we're doing today, is the pituitary gland secretes a hormone called ADH, which we are going to focus on. And the third part of your brain is the medulla. The medulla is responsible for lots of unconscious, involuntary responses. In particular, it controls your heart rate and your breathing rate. But I just wanted to do a quick recap on the structure of the brain, because we're going to be focusing on your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland today. Okay, so now we're going to look at ADH and the hypothalamus and how they contribute to the selective reabsorption of water and ions. Okay, so now we're looking at selective reabsorption. Right. In an ideal world, this is my normal water levels, okay? So we want to keep our homeostasis. The definition of homeostasis is the maintenance of the internal environment. We want to keep things constant. That's not always possible because we live in a changing environment, but we want to keep things constant. So, the example I gave, there are times where your water level decreases. It's either due to a lack of drinking or lack of water, or it could be because you're exercising and you're sweating a lot. Okay, so your water levels decrease. When your water levels decrease, that is not good. The first thing that notices it is your hypothalamus. So your hypothalamus has what we call osmoreceptors, which means they detect water. So your hypothalamus will detect low water levels. They will then send a message to the pituitary gland, and that will tell your pituitary gland to secrete ADH. That ADH will then go to the kidney, and it will tell the kidney to reabsorb water. So your water levels go back up to normal. There are other times, though, where you might drink a lot. Your hypothalamus will detect that. That will then send a message to the pituitary gland to say no ADH. So now no ADH is going to the kidney, which means no water is reabsorbed. So this is an example of negative feedback because it's trying to maintain levels as close to normal levels as possible. So that's the constant maintenance of your water levels, and it's ADH which does that. So ADH is released when there's not enough water to make sure you reabsorb more water. Okay. Oh, we've done that. There are times, though, where your kidney will fail. We don't necessarily need to know reasons why.
Is the selective reabsorption of water entirely dependent on the release of ADH?
As far as you need to know, yes. The answer is there are other things. Aldosterone is another hormone which has a big effect. But for your specification, we just need to know about ADH. Okay? There are times where your kidney fails. So the best thing to do when your kidney fails is obviously the advantage of having two kidneys is one of them will always work. If both of them stop working, you've got an issue. So the best treatment for kidney failure is to have a transplant. But you can't just pluck any old kidney from anyone. It has to be a similar tissue type, which often means it has to be a relative, which is why we have very few kidney donors. So it's often an issue that actually we don't have enough donors. So why most people will always start their kidney treatment by having something called dialysis. And what happens in dialysis is, apologies for my diagram here, but I'm sure is somebody will go to the hospital. They'll probably have to go to the hospital 2 or 3 times a week, each time for about 3 or 4 hours every single time. So it's not particularly convenient treatment, but most people have dialysis before or whilst they're on the waiting list for a transplant. And what happens is their blood gets taken out of their arm and gets passed through a dialysis machine. The dialysis fluid has got a healthy concentration of glucose, a healthy concentration of ions, and a healthy concentration of water. But the key thing is it doesn't have any urea in it. So the main aim of dialysis is to ensure that all urea moves from a patient's bloodstream into the dialysis fluid. So you're getting rid of the urea because it's the urea that's the main thing that's toxic. So that's how dialysis works. A common question you're likely to get is to evaluate or to compare and contrast them. And effectively, an advantage of dialysis is really the same as like a disadvantage of transplant or vice versa. So these are the things you need to talk about. Dialysis can be quick, as in you can do it immediately. It cleans your blood and it maintains a healthy blood of glucose, water, ions. But you have to go to the hospital regularly, 2 or 3 hours, which over time means it's very expensive. Because you're only going to the hospital every other day, you have to ensure you're controlling your diet every day so you don't build up toxins. A transplant is the long-term solution because then you're hopefully never going to a hospital again, which also means it's cheaper because although the operation's expensive, you're then not having a huge amount of treatment afterwards. But you need to have these things called immunosuppressants because the kidney does not belong to you, so you want to stop your body from rejecting it. And we have a limited number. Also, it is a massive operation, and not everybody is suitable for an operation that lasts about 6 hours. So you have to be pretty healthy and to some extent pretty young. I'd count myself in that category still, just to have a kidney operation because it is a big piece of surgery. Okay? So that's kind of going through everything. As per the last few videos as well, I've added some past paper questions, so I suggest you go to them, pause the video, then check the mark scheme, pause the video, check the mark scheme, pause the video, and check the mark scheme, so then you can test your understanding.